Hi, welcome to MOOC BHS130 Anatomy and Physiology 1, and welcome back for the second part of Anatomy Part 2, the respiratory system. I'm Franelia Francis, your instructor for today's topic. So without further ado, let's begin and continue the second part of the anatomy. So in the previous session, we have actually gone through the first part of the respiratory tract, which is the upper. So today we are going to look into the second part of the anatomy of the respiratory tract, lower respiratory tract, in which we will learn about the trachea, the bronchi, bronchioles, lungs, and the alveoli. So this is the picture of the lower respiratory tract, starting from the trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, and thoracic cage, diaphragm, and the lungs. So trachea. So what is trachea? In layman term, trachea is known as windpipe. It is a flexible cylinder, as you can see in the picture, with cartilage, the one that you can see like a stripes there, to give it stiffness and keep it from collapsing. Inferior to cricoid cartilage, below the cricoid cartilage, and it extends from the larynx to the mediastinum, which is around your chest region. It is divided into left and right primary bronchi at the fifth thoracic vertebra. The trachea is lined by the pseudo-stratified epithelium associated with goblet cells that is involved in the mucus production or mucus secretion due to its abundant seromucous glands. The trachea has 16 to 20 C shape of cartilage that helps to prevent air passage from collapse. It is strengthened by ligaments. The posterior wall of trachea has no cartilage, the behind of the trachea, and it contains connective tissue and smooth muscle. And this posterior wall of trachea helps to contract during coughing and provides the esophagus with room to expand when a large bolus of food is swallowed. I have actually explained in the previous session about the esophagus, which is behind the trachea. So here is the look of the trachea. You can see the C-shaped rings. Below the cricoid cartilage starts the trachea. You have the first trachea ring, second, third, and so forth. Previously in my session, I mentioned about trachea being the anterior part of the esophagus, or inferior to or front to esophagus. As you can see in the picture, trachea is in front of the esophagus, and the last trachea cartilage is suspended and contains a sensitive posterior projection known as the carina, which I will show the picture shortly. The mucous membrane in the carina is the most sensitive than the larynx and trachea, and this carina can trigger cough reflex. So here this is a picture of the trachea, and end of the trachea is the carina before it divides into left and right bronchi. Moving on with bronchi, the trachea divides into two main bronchi, the right and the left. The right main bronchus is wider, shorter, and more vertical than the left, meaning to say it's almost straight, and is more likely to be obstructed by a foreign object. So what does it mean? When you swallow something and you did not swallow it properly, it goes into your right lung much more easier than the left because of the almost straight shape of the bronchi. The air reaching the bronchi has been filtered, warmed, and humidified. It is lined by the pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium and supported by the C-shaped cartilage. Diving further into the bronchial tree, each main bronchus, which is the singular for bronchi earlier on, divides into lobar bronchi, and this is known as secondary bronchi. There are three lobar bronchi on the right, one for each of the three lobes of the right lung, and two lobar bronchi on the left, one for each of the two lobes of the left lung. We will see the picture after this. So here you can see in the picture, the left side of the slide is your right lung, and the right side of your slide is the left lung, and you can see there are three lobes of in the right lung and two lobes on the left lung, and three right bronchi on the right lung, two on the left lung. The lobar bronchi further divide to yield segmental bronchi, which is known as tertiary bronchi, that divides into smaller bronchi until about 23 branching. The tertiary bronchi supply air to a single bronchopulmonary segment. Once the passageways have a diameter less than 1 millimeters, they are known as bronchioles. So bronchi goes into bronchioles. Ultimately, the bronchioles branch into terminal bronchioles. This is the end of the bronchioles. So the terminal bronchioles are the last bronchioles without alveoli, and the bronchioles with alveoli are known as respiratory bronchioles and lead into alveolar ducts. The cartilage in walls decrease and smooth muscle increase with branching. Relaxation and contraction of smooth muscle control the diameter of air passageways. So here is a comparison between a normal and abnormal bronchiole. So in a normal bronchiole, you can see that the diameter is wide, allowing the air goes in and out smoothly. However, in an asthmatic bronchiole simply means a person who is having asthma will have a very narrow bronchiole in which the air will not go in smoothly, and you can see there's a yellowish fluid inside the bronchiole, that is the mucus, that actually hinders the flow of the air in and out, and therefore those who have asthma will have difficulty in breathing. So in short, you can see this is a picture of the bronchi, bronchial tree, and the lungs. So the bronchi, as you can see, it will branch into smaller parts like the primary bronchi, secondary bronchi, tertiary bronchi, until it reaches the bronchioles. And the bronchioles will also further divide until it reaches terminal bronchioles. Only then it divides further with the alveoli, and that's the end part of the bronchioles. Before we go into the alveoli, we need to know the lungs. Now lungs is divided into left and right lung, and there are fissures. Fissures is just like a straight line that separates the lobes of the lung. The right lung has 3, the left lungs have 2 lobes, and there is this concavity on the medial surface known as a cardiac notch. This is where on the left side of the lung is where your heart is being placed, okay? And there is serious fluid lubricates the lung during breathing in order to reduce the friction. In this picture, you will see that the lungs are spongy tissues that sit within the pleural cavity. Pleural cavity is a space where the lungs is situated, and we will talk more about the pleural cavity shortly. Alveolar ducts and alveoli. The respiratory bronchioles end in ducts and sacs, which is known as the respiratory membrane. The alveolar ducts have many openings in the alveoli, which is the tiny air sacs, and there are elastic fibers surrounding the area of the alveoli that allows them to expand and recoil without collapsing, to make it, contract and smaller. Okay, contract and relax, but it will not collapse in a way, it will not stop ballooning itself. So in the picture on the right side, you will see that the alveoli is shown in the color orangey peach kind of picture. Yeah, alveoli is a very unique feature, unique structure. It is a single cell wall, one cell thick, very thin. This is because it allows easier diffusion of the gas in and out from the blood into the alveoli and eventually out from the lung, and from the lung goes into the alveoli and exchange oxygen into the blood. So as you can see that it is actually surrounded on the right side of the picture, surrounded with a capillaries, very thin layer of blood vessels, capillaries. Red is where the oxygen is being carried on, and the blue is showing where the carbon dioxide is being carried. Let's look into what are the cells of the respiratory membrane. The alveolar walls consist of few types of cell. The first one is type 1 cell, allowing gas exchange with pulmonary capillaries. As you can see, the type 1 cell is composed of simple squamous epithelium in the picture. Type 2 cell, also known as septal cell, secretes a substance known as surfactant. that prevents alveoli's collapse during exhalation and reduce surface tension. Earlier I have mentioned that the thin wall of an alveolus is primarily composed of a simple squamous epithelium. Gas exchange occurs easily across this very thin epithelium by simple diffusion. And there is also what we call the dust cells, alveolomacrophages, that remove debris and microbes from the inner surface of the alveolus. Now this is what it looks like in an alveolus, and many alveolus is known as alveoli. So there is an gas exchange happening there, a very thin layer to allow easy diffusion. The role of surfactant, which is type 2 just now. The water in the alveolar fluid creates surface tension. Surface tension is due to the strong attraction between water molecules at the surface of a liquid, which draws the water molecules closer together. Surfactant is a mixture of phospholipids and lipoproteins, which lowers the surface tension of the alveolar fluid. So this is very, very important in order not to allow the lung to collapse. So let's look at the features of alveoli and the function in gas exchange. So we know that there are a large number of alveoli in the lungs. So what is the purpose of it, having so many alveoli in the lungs? It is, of course, to increase the surface area for gas exchange, to allow more gases to have the pathway to go into the lungs and further into the body. And then the walls are made of single cells. Why is it so? Because gases can diffuse rapidly across the thin walls. And the walls secrete a thin lining of moisture. What is the function? The gases can dissolve in moisture and diffuse easily across the wall. That's why the thin lining of the moisture helps the gases to dissolve. And we know that the alveoli is surrounded by a network of blood capillaries that helps in transporting oxygen and carbon dioxide efficiently. So this is a very good point here to allow you to understand how the alveoli works. The pleural cavities and pleural membranes. Each lung is covered by one pleura. So meaning to say the right lung will be covered by one pleura and the left lung will be covered by another pleura. Pleura is a serous membrane lining the pleural cavity, and there are two lines there. The outer part is known as the parietal pleura that attaches to the walls of the pleural cavity. I will show you the picture shortly. And we have visceral pleura, which is inside and that adheres to the surface of the lungs, from the lungs itself, on the lungs itself. And in between of these two pleura, there is what we call a pleural cavity that has pleural fluid, and this pleural fluid fills and lubricates the space between the pleura to reduce friction while you are breathing in and out. So this is a picture of the pleura, and you can see that the visceral pleura is in the inner part of your pleural cavity, which is on the lung itself, and in between of the visceral and parietal pleura, there is a space called pleural cavity that holds the pleural fluid, and only then it is covered by another lining called the parietal pleura. So that's the end of the first and second part of the anatomy of the respiratory system. So in summary, we have covered that the structures of the respiratory system can be divided into the upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract. And we have respiratory system that can be separated into two zones, conducting and respiratory zones, which we will cover in the next lecture. And the respiratory system's primary function includes gas exchange between air and circulating blood. So for the upcoming subtopics, we will look into the breathing mechanism, looking at how your lungs breathe in and breathe out, the gas transport, which is occurring in the alveoli, the respiratory centers in the brain that controls breathing, and last but not least is the aging and the respiratory system. So stay tuned. Thank you very much for your attention. I will see you in the next session.